Hey church, welcome and thank you for worshiping with us. Wherever you're worshiping, in your home or on your TV, laptop or phone, you are a part of this family. And you could watch or listen to past messages by heading to mycornerstone.family. On our sermons page, you can view playlists, search for past messages, and more. You can even listen to our content by subscribing to the Cornerstone America's podcast, which can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I hope you enjoy the message and thank you for being a part of the Cornerstone family.
All right, let's get into our message this morning. We're talking about when dreams shatter. We're continuing in our series from the first book of the Bible. It's Genesis. We're talking about our imperfect family because all of our families are a bit messed up. And as we're looking at this book, Genesis, we're looking at the lives of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and their families. And what we're finding, even in these ancient families, these ancient stories, we can identify with the messes and the problems that they were experiencing. And even they experienced shattered dreams. And in the case of the story we're going to read here in Genesis 16, it was Sarah's inability to have a child. It was infertility. And if we just get honest this morning, all of us carry shattered dreams at some time or another, places of disappointment where life has not turned out the way we had hoped, or turns out far less than the way we had hoped. Think about it, even Paul, I think, experienced shattered dreams at times. Romans chapter 15, verse 24, Paul writing here to the Christians at Rome, he says, I plan to do so when I go to Spain. I mean, he's talking about, I'm going to come visit you on my way to Spain. He says, I hope to see you while passing through and to have you assist me on my journey there, after I have enjoyed your company for a while. So he had been dreaming about this trip that he would go to Rome and see the believers there and encourage them, pour into them and let them pour into him. And then he would travel on to Spain, taking the gospel even further out than he had ever gone. Well, he did make it to Rome. He never made it to Spain. He didn't go to Rome as a free man. He went under arrest. He had been arrested prior, and then he appealed to Caesar, and they took him to Rome. He spent time in jail there. We believe, according to Christian history, he was eventually let out and martyred for his faith, never making it to Spain. I believe he had a shattered dream, but God used it nonetheless. And in our text here in Genesis 16, Sarah and Abraham have a shattered dream. We see here in verse 1, it says, now Sarai, remember Sarai is the same person as Sarah. Her name has just not been changed yet by God. And when it talks about Abram's the same person as Abraham. His name has just not been changed by God yet. So I will talk about them interchangeably. So now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. This was the problem. She had borne him no children. Their shattered dream was that they couldn't have kids. And the truth is, we all have shattered dreams. We all have hopes that don't come true. And in that time, what do? Do we question God? Do we question, why is this not happening to me? How do I live with this? And there's a significant amount of people, even in the U.S., that deal with infertility. But we all deal with shattered dreams on one level or another. And so they're dealing with this. And how do they deal with it? What becomes very interesting is that we find out in this problem that Abraham and Sarah are having, it's not just a physical problem, but there's a spiritual component there. There's a spiritual problem that's going on in their life. If you've ever talked to somebody with a shattered dream, you'll recognize it's not just a physical problem or a financial problem or a future problem. It's a spiritual problem. They're asking the question, God, why is this happening to me? Are you punishing me? What have I done that's causing you to withhold this from me? And I believe Sarah was experiencing that. I think Abraham was experiencing that. If we read this verse, these two verses again, says that she had borne no children. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. This is what she says to her husband. And I think she means something here on two different levels. I think maybe on one level she's saying like there is the sovereignty of God, generally speaking, and that she has not been able to conceive. But I think there's something deeper in her response here. And I think the response here is that God is withholding that she has done something, or God is angry with her, or God is punishing her for something, and therefore she can't have a child. And anytime we have a shattered dream, many times we ask that same question. God, are you punishing me? What have I done? Am I doing something wrong? And I don't think there's ever anything with reevaluating our life and how are we living? Are we living the way God wants us to? And are we being obedient? Is there sin that we need to confess or deal with and get right? But sometimes we think just God is up there just waiting to punish us, waiting to just shatter our dreams. I think sometimes we have this inaccurate view of God. We also have to remember that the inability to have a baby in Sarah's day, I think, was much worse than even in our day. This inability to conceive a child in the ancient world meant that for a man, his name would not be carried on. And for a woman, it meant that she was a failure in life. I mean, it's not like Sarah could say, yeah, I can't have a child, but yet I have a successful career. She had no career. I have my own business. I have this other outlet. She had nothing in their day. She felt like the Lord has kept me from having children. And so she's processing this. And I think thinking, God is withholding this from me. He is punishing me with this. And this is the view of many of in Bible's times, they had this idea when things didn't work out their way, or we ended up in this alternate path that was just less than what we'd hoped for, they felt like God was punishing them. Think about John chapter 9, verse 1. Jesus is on the scene. And as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. So he was born this way. This is the only person Jesus healed where it says he was blind or had this ailment from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned? Notice the question here, who sinned? Was it him or was it his parents? Who sinned? And they had this idea back then, and they had people that taught that the baby could sin in the womb, and if the baby did sin in the womb, then we'd be born with some sort of ailment. And in this case, the disciples were thinking, the baby sinned in the womb, therefore it's born blind. Now we look at that and we say, we know that's not true. But they said this man or his parents, or the parents sinned while the baby was in the womb. And so therefore, this is how God dealt with it, with this baby being blind, this man being born blind. This was their thinking. This is where their theology was. To us, we look at this, we think this is ridiculous. But this is what was being taught. And so notice too that they're looking for a cause. They're looking for a cause. But Jesus is going to look to the answer. He doesn't even deal with it. But they're asking him this question. Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he's born blind? But Jesus goes on in verse 3, says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. So Jesus really here, not dealing with the cause, says neither this man nor his parents. You guys are off track. You're looking for a cause. I'm looking for what I'm going to do. I'm looking for God's compassion into the situation. And it says here, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in this man. And this, even in the English, I think leads us to believe that this happened for a reason. This happened because God wanted to heal him eventually. It's almost like God made him blind so that later he could heal him. And that's, I think, the indication we get from the English. But I would say in the Greek, it reads differently. That it doesn't mean that God made him blind. And so Greek scholars, they will say that there's a way they would translate this verse that would lead us to believe a little bit differently than we read in the English. They would translate it like this: neither this man nor his parents sinned, but let the works of God be displayed in him. Meaning Jesus isn't even talking about the causation here. He's talking about what he wants to do. Many times we're looking for the cause, and instead of looking for God's compassion, what he wants to do in this situation. And actually, what he's saying basically says, you guys are asking the wrong question. You're looking for somebody to blame. There's no such cause effect here. He said, instead, let's look to what God wants to do in this situation and in this circumstance. So the question becomes, how do we respond to shattered dreams? Because we all experience shattered dreams from time to time. The first one is we refuse to move without God's direction. This is what we get out of the story. We refuse to move without God's direction. What we see here in verse 1 through 3 is that Sarah starts to move without God's direction. Now, Sarah, Abram's wife, which we read, had borne him no children. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Now, notice he mentions it's an Egyptian slave, which means many scholars believe that this Egyptian slave was picked up while they were in Egypt. So they went to Egypt. Remember, we covered this a couple weeks ago. Probably not in God's will. They went there for a famine. They come out. Pharaoh gives them a ton of stuff. They come away with Hagar, and now Sarah's like, let's use her. So it's interesting. They probably picked her up along the way. The next verse says, so she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. So go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abraham agreed to what Sarah said. So now Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, which gives us a time frame here. It had been at least 10 years since God had given him the promise that he would have a child. So you see, they're getting a little impatient here. They're starting to move without God's direction. Many times when we have shattered dreams, we want to just move out in a direction without first asking God, praying about, God, what should I do? Instead of being patient. So they had been in the land of Canaan for 10 years. Sarah, his wife had taken her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave it to her husband. And we know how the rest of the story goes. Now, what happens many times when we're experiencing shattered dreams, there's kind of multiple options that we can kind of move into. And one of them is bitterness. And we see that she starts to become bitter in what's going on. We look at verse 4. It says, he slept with Hagar and she conceived. And when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress, Sarah. Then Sarah said to Abram, you're responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. Now she starts to blame. First, she's getting bitter. She said, I put my slave in your arms, and now she knows she's pregnant. She despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. And Abraham says, your slave is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled. So we see bitterness starting to sink in. And don't we feel that too, wanting to sink into our lives when we have shattered dreams, when life isn't turning out the way we thought, the way we had hoped, the way we expected, the way we had been praying? It's easy to move into bitterness. We start getting bitter about the situation. We start to focus on what we don't have instead of what we do have. And it starts to really inflict our heart. Or we become fatalistic. This is another option we have. We could become fatalistic. And fatalism is basically saying, this is my destiny. I'm just destined to have a shattered dream and not have any other dreams, or never to make it, or there's no other options. It's fatalism. This is my life, and this will always be my life. And Sarah could have jumped into that and became fatalistic and said, this is just like God has predestined this for me, and my life will never be any better, and just live in that. But that really wasn't her problem. She didn't get fatalistic. She went this other route, take control. Some of us, we get into that take control mode where we just want to we kind of push God out and we say, God, you don't know what's best for my life. You're not doing what I want you to do. So I'm just going to take control. I've got a better plan than you, and I'm just going to try and make this happen in my own strength. We take control. Anybody ever have a problem with take control? I think this runs pretty heavy in America for the most part. There is some of this fatalism. We just kind of give in to that and just think this is my life. I'm going to be stuck in this situation forever, no matter what it is financially or addiction or whatever our issue might be. Shattered dreams. So she had some options here. And she had two options. If you go to my next slide, she really had two options. The first one was adoption, and the other one is surrogacy, which this was a form of surrogacy back in their day. This was typical. If you couldn't have a child, they would bring in their servant, and they would have a child through that servant. This was typical. This was their way of surrogacy. But she did have another option. They had adoption as an option, which they had already tried, and God said no to. If we go back to Genesis 15, verses 1 and 2. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? So it's his servant. I don't have a child, so this one will be the one who inherits my estate. And so this is a form of adoption. And Abram said, you have given me no children, so my servant in my household will be my heir. In a sense, this was a route of adoption. And we talk about shattered dreams of infertility. Those two options are still possibilities. There's lots of help that we can find in this area of infertility, or really in any area where our dreams are shattered. There's other options that we can explore and look at. Now, if you go to my next slide, I mean, Sarah had a plan. She was taking it into her own hands to try and make this happen. And I want to flesh this out a little bit. I think there's something right about what she was doing and definitely something wrong about what she was doing. I think something right is, I think that there are a lot of times when we have shattered dreams, there's something we can do. I think there's something we should do. And I think we should prayerfully ask God, Lord, my dreams have been shattered. What do you want me to do now? And if he says wait, then we just wait. If he says do something, then we do something. And we check out our options and begin to prayerfully look at our options. I think there's nothing wrong with it. I think that's part of, Sarah could have done this a different way. What was right, is to say, God, what should I do now? And for her, it probably would have been, wait, I'm going to bring you the promise, just wait. And that's a valid answer that God would have given her. I think what's wrong is I think there was difference. What she was going through was maybe different. She was probably more full of anxiety and fear and a lack of faith and pushing God to the side, say, I'm going to do it my way because God, you're not doing it on my timetable. And I think that's where she went wrong. I think there's nothing wrong when we have shattered dreams to look to God and say, God, what do I do now? Years ago, Stacy and I had shattered dreams. Back in the 90s, we planted it. Maybe some of you were alive then. Back in the 90s, we planted a church and we pastored it for 10 years and saw God do amazing things. We were reaching families, impacting lives. We had a youth group that we led on Sunday nights that had 80 to 100 kids in there that were being impacted by the gospel every week. And then it came a point in time where God called us away from that and we closed the doors and moved on. And I had determined in my heart when we started this church that I would be there forever. That I was going to start this church, I was going to pastor this church, and I was going to retire from this church. I had resigned it. I was going to stay here for my entire life. And so when we saw the signs shutting down and walking away, my dream shattered. And I didn't know what to do. And we went looking for another church to go to. And we found another church where my friend was the pastor. And what I found to do was to serve in any way I could. And I found somehow healing in just sweeping the floor after outreach Saturday. And I would grab the vacuum. After we were done helping and serving, I would grab the vacuum and I would start vacuuming. I gotta say it right here. You guys don't sweep the floor down here. You vacuum. In Ohio, we vacuum the floor with a vacuum cleaner. But I was vacuuming, sweeping versus vacuum. I would vacuum the floor. And somehow in serving this other pastor and serving this church, God brought healing to me in the midst of my shattered dreams. A lot of times there's options. What are we to do? God, what do you want me to do now? And sometimes that option is go help somebody else. And that became the option for us. We went and we just served. Now, there was another point in time when I was at that church, a man was talking to me. And I had my own questions on why this all happened. And I was sitting there, this man was really talking to me, and I don't know what he was talking about, but he was talking, then all of a sudden while he was talking, God starts talking to me. And he starts telling me why the things happened the way they did and why we closed the door and what God was going to do. A lot of times if we just continue to follow him, he brings answers to us, continues to lead us and guide us, and brings our shattered dreams together for his glory. That's the great thing about the God that we serve. So number one, we refuse to move without God's direction. Number two, we remember that God sees you even when you feel invisible. That God sees you even when you feel invisible. We see this in the text here in verse 7. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring, right? She had fled because she's being mistreated. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from? And where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. I imagine that had to be a very difficult thing to do. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. Again here, the angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant and you will give birth to a son and you shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery. The Lord heard her. Angel of the Lord, this is the first time the angel of the Lord is used in Genesis. It's known to be the angel of Yahweh. This could very well be God just showed up on the scene there. Or maybe it was the pre-incarnate Christ. Jesus, before he took on flesh, shows up to her and has this encounter. In verse 13, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. So she names God. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. In the midst of our shattered dreams, in the midst of our problems, in the midst of our failures, we may feel like we're invisible, but God sees you. The question is, do we see him? He sees us, he hears us, he knows what's going on. But are we tuning in to him? Where is our focus at? When you think about where is our focus? Sarah's focus was on her shattered dream. Hagar's focus was on her mistreatment that she was receiving. And many times we've got to refocus. How many know it's easier to focus on the problem? It's easier to focus on what's bothering us, rather focus on God. There's so many, I don't know, Stacey and we talk about it, there's so many things going good in our life, but it's easy to focus on that one thing that's bothering you. Does anybody else struggle with that? We struggle with that. And we could list off 20, 30, things that are going right, that are going well, but there's one thing, and we'll let that one thing bother us. We have to refocus, to focus back on God, focus on the good things. We take so much for granted, right? We take so much for granted. Have you gone through and just made a list of all the things you can be thankful for? I mean, if you just start thinking about it, there's so much. I mean, just let the electricity go off today. You'll stop taking electricity for granted. Let the water not work today, and we'll be reminded how important water is. We take so much for granted, and we'll let one thing ruin our day when we've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 other things that are just fabulous. Refocus. Are we focused on the right things? Will we trust God even when our dreams are shattered? Will we focus on what we have instead of what we don't have? Will we try to control outcomes rather than submitting to God's timing and to his way? Do we believe God sees me even when I don't see him? God sees us. Will we fix our eyes on the pain, or will we fix our eyes on God's promise? That's our choice. What will we do in the midst of shattered dreams? Do we trust God? And the question becomes, who is God? Is he this God that is wanting to punish you? I don't think that's what we see from the scriptures. I don't think that's what we see from the life of Jesus. It's a God that wants to heal us, that wants to deliver us, that wants to lead us, that wants to guide us, wants to bring his love and grace and mercy into our lives and change us. A plan for good and not evil, to give us a future and a hope. That's the God that we serve. And that's the God we need to keep focused on. He is the way, the truth, and the life. Will you stand up with me this morning as we get ready to close in prayer? Who is God? He's not trying to withhold anything from you. He's not trying to punish you. He's not trying to put you down. He wants to bless your life. He wants to lead you. He wants to guide you. He wants you to have peace. He wants you to have joy. He wants it to be separated from the external, that even in the midst of shattered dreams, even in the midst of problems, to have peace, to have joy, to continue to experience his compassion and blessing on our life.